Hi, my name is Allison Rothwell, and I am a clinical instructor for Kansas State University. And today, our seminar module is going to be all about the Kansas multi-tiered system of support. What is differentiation? Differentiation is what we do as teachers to help meet the needs of all individual learners in our classrooms. Today, we are going to talk about a system put in place by Kansas to help us have a better handle on differentiating. A multi-tiered system of support is a term used by Kansas, MTSS. This term describes how schools provide support for all children in order to help them be successful. It also describes the processes and tools teachers use to aid their decision-making. Two laws influence this implementation. First, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, most recently referred to as No Child Left Behind, and second, the 2004 reauthorization of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. IDEA is the federal law that defines special education. The concept of response to intervention, or RTI, was introduced in the 2004 reauthorization of IDEA and has influenced the way districts identify and serve students with exceptionalities. These two laws support the implementation of the Kansas MTSS. Some actually believe it's synonymous with RTI. The best form of implementation would be a school-wide approach. However, if one is not in place, the classroom teacher can definitely move through the same steps to understand and meet the needs of all students. Quite simply, first, assess all students and analyze the data. Who met your expectations? Who is below your expectations? And who scored above your expectations? Next, make a plan. How are you going to meet the needs of all students? The students who really struggled, the students who need just a little bit more of a push, and the students who need some enrichment. Monitor progress, and then finally reassess everyone to show growth, or make a new plan for intervention. When we think about why we differentiate, it is because all students learn differently and have different needs. We know this, but often we struggle to figure out how to support the many different levels in our classroom. Again, we have 3 levels of support: the all, the some, and the few. MTSS is built upon those 3 tiers. Tier 1. Tier 1 describes all students. This should be about 80% of your class. When you plan your lessons, these are your target students. I've referred to them as all. You assess these students through the general unit and quarterly assessments. But some students need a little bit more. Those would be Tier 2 students. These are the borderline students. They aren't too far below, but they typically need reviews and reteaching in small groups. And then, most likely, they'll understand the concept. This is typically about 15% of your class. Interventions are put in place, and progress is monitored often to make decisions about intervention progress and design. Then there are the students who need intensive, targeted skill intervention. These students would be Tier 3 students. Most of them have IEPs or other plans in place for customized intervention time, and this is typically about 5% of your class. Progress with these students would be monitored weekly. Most schools and districts begin by focusing on academics with multi-tiered system of support. However, there is also a behavior side as well. And most oftentimes, once the academics of MTSS have been figured out, a behavior plan is put in place to address the different tiers of behavior intervention. We want to have high expectations for all students and ourselves as teachers. Tier 1 students are typically easy to plan for because those are your regular lesson plans. What do you want to teach? How are you going to teach it? For Tier 3 students, we often have the support of resource teachers and, most specifically, individualized education plans with interventions already laid out nicely. It's the Tier 2 students that we sometimes struggle with. Sometimes they fall between the cracks. These are the students who need just a little bit more practice, and we as teachers need to provide the time for them to practice and have some tutoring, whether this be through stations, peer tutoring, teacher tutoring, extra practice. It is our job to make sure that we are meeting the needs of all of our students in all 3 tiers. Luckily, the overwhelming task of meeting the needs of all of your students is usually not all on your shoulders. Classroom teachers need to know all of their students' abilities and needs, but taking a school-wide approach typically provides collaboration and assistance from other staff members. So how do we know what tiers our students belong in? Well, it's all about assessment. And at the beginning of the year, or as new students arrive, we look at their most recent data. We look at their DIBELS scores, their Scholastic Reading Inventory scores, their Math Inventory scores, previous state assessment scores. All districts have assessments in place in order to collect data and compare our students to where they are supposed to be for their grade level. As teachers, we need to know those benchmarks. We need to know what scores are meeting standards. We need to know what students would need in order to be exceeding standards, and then what students would need to be in order to be below standards. Once we know how our students have scored and where they fit among their classmates, then we sort them into tiers. Then, after we know the tiers, we decide what will our intervention time look like, what will our core teaching time look like, and how are we going to meet the needs of all of our students. This is an example of one district's plan for reading intervention. The two assessments this district gives for reading would be the Scholastic Reading Inventory and DIBELS. You'll notice that this table is color-coded. Red would be for Tier 3, yellow is for Tier 2, green is for Tier 1, and blue would be for the advanced students. So basically, teachers would give the assessments, they would look at their students' scores, and then they would look below to see where they would fit on this continuum. For example, if a student scored 415 on their Scholastic Reading Inventory, 415 would be the student's Lexile level, and they would look below to see if that is meeting benchmark or below benchmark. And for third grade, 415 is below benchmark. This table is nice because this district has put together intervention programs for each of these categories and progress monitoring ideas as well. Here is an example of one school intervention plan. On Mondays and Tuesdays, the whole school does intervention time with reading. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, the whole school does intervention time with math. And as you can see, each grade level has its own 30-minute time slot for intervention time. Many times when a school has a school-wide intervention program, they incorporate support personnel. In this example, where there are 3 sections of a grade level, each classroom teacher would take a group, each tutor would take a small group, and the special education resource teacher would take a small group. 6 small groups of students learning at the level that is most appropriate for them. In this scenario, even the high achievers can be a part of a differentiated group. In my opinion, this is an ideal plan. However, it isn't always a realistic plan. In some schools, this would not be possible because there is only one grade level teacher. Some schools don't have tutors. Some schools are not able to use their specialists in this way. Another school model I've seen is where the entire school has an MTSS time or intervention time at one time during the day. All teachers or staff members have their hands on deck and can help out. The nice thing about having a school-wide intervention schedule is that the time is precious and off limits. If there is a special event or an assembly, intervention time is rarely skipped. When teachers are expected to conduct their own intervention times within their classrooms, it is an easy block of time to skip. Too many skipped MTSS times will directly impact student achievement. The biggest part of MTSS is the progress monitoring. How are the students doing when interventions have been put into place? This documentation is so important because if students continue to struggle and you as a classroom teacher are trying to get to the bottom of it and bring the student to the school's student improvement team or intervention team, you have to be able to explain what you've tried, how long you've tried it, and what didn't work. If you tried 4 or 5 different strategies within a 2-week time period, it would be hard to know if the strategies didn't work or if they just weren't given a chance to work. It is important to try the same intervention for at least 2 entire weeks before deciding to change it. An intervention would be the strategy you are using with specific students to improve their understanding. Then, You can't just collect the data, but you need to look at the data and talk about the data. My former principal had monthly data checks where teachers brought their progress monitoring to discuss their students' progress. You really need to know your students. Here is one example of a data log used by a math tutor. She recorded the skills she was working on with her Tier 3 student down the left-hand side of the table. Then, as the student was progress monitored every week, his scores were entered into the columns on the right side. At the end of the 5-week period, the teacher was able to show growth as the progress monitoring scores increased each week. This data table might look familiar to you. Many teachers use data tables like this to record their assessment scores. Student names would be recorded down the left-hand side. Objectives would be written across the top. This table is easy to read. I can glance at it and see some strong areas. Notice the 100s that jump out at you. However, many teachers take this type of chart to the next level to make it even easier to analyze. This is the same chart with one simple change. It is color-coded. Some teachers call this type of data chart a Go Green chart. Why? Because green is the goal. You'll notice scores above 70 are green. 70 must be the criteria for mastery here. Yellow would be for student scores approaching or developing. Red would be scores for students who are way below the expectations. Data charts like these are easy to read. I see one student who struggled in every single objective. I see some objectives where quite a few students struggled. It is clear which objectives are problems for specific students and which objectives need to be retaught to the majority of the class. You might wonder whether students stay in the specific MTSS tiers. Well, sometimes they do, but sometimes they move. Tier 3 typically stays constant. These students are students who don't just struggle with what is currently being taught. They struggle with skills that were taught previously, sometimes in previous grade levels. Tier 1 and 2 students do move more often in between the tiers, especially in math. For example, one math unit might be more difficult to a specific student than another math unit. Many schools adjust their tiers monthly or quarterly. Today we focused on the multi-tiered system of support geared toward academics. Don't forget, this system of support is also in place in many schools for behavior interventions as well. Many districts and schools have positive behavior intervention programs in place. One example would be CHAMPS. Much like academics, data is collected for the students in the school. Which students struggle to meet the behavior expectations continuously? Which students struggle every once in a while? What interventions can be put into place in order to keep the focus on all students? And how can schools be proactive instead of reactive? These are all questions schools work to answer as they implement their MTSS behavior intervention supports. Differentiation is so important, and good teachers differentiate all day long in every single subject. Kansas has an excellent system in place to help us and support us as we differentiate in our classrooms. Please think about everything you learned today. How can you immediately go back to student teaching and apply it in your thinking, in your planning, in your teaching, and your assessment?